I would say welcome back, but there has been no previous videos. So, welcome. This is Dreams and Journeys. I'm not Dreams and Journeys. The channel name is Dreams and Journey. But I have been feeling rather moved to read this book over the course of maybe a week or so. Definitely a week and some change. And that book is the American Book of the Dead, which is pretty much a westernized version of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. At least to me, this could just be considered a westernized version of a funerary text, which is basically just something that's read to people that are in the transition process, or people or beings that have already transitioned or died, quote unquote, depending on however you perceive that or whatever word you use for that process. But I have read this book up until maybe you've maybe read maybe around 75% of it. So there still is a little bit that I have to read, which is probably the reason why it's been pinging in my mind the way that it has been. But we're definitely gonna get into this. It's not too big of a book, so it's not like something that you'll have to, sit through 72 parts to get to the end. But reading just a little day by day, uploading this, and seeing if this is something that gravitates to other seekers out there. I am by no means a professional reader, so I will try to find the PDF and attach that in the description below so that you can read on your own, which you should, but definitely try to attach that so that you can do just that. I am skipping the first two preferences. I usually skip all of them in totality, but since I'm reading for folks, I know that there definitely are people out there that likes to read in completion, but I will not be reading the first two. But I will be reading EJ's his preference, what he wrote. The first two are from some publishers, and that's no shade to those two beings. That's just not what I feel like reading, nor do I feel moved to, respectfully speaking. But we're just gonna jump straight into this. I'm not entirely certain how long this will go on. Maybe 30 minutes and some change, or a chapter. Not too certain, but here we are. We're gonna get straight into the author's preface, and it reads as follows. This is really the book I didn't want to write. They all say that, but I really mean it. If there had been anything I could have done to avoid it, I would have. For years, I really believed everyone knew all about this stuff, and that they were joking when they claimed no knowledge. It wasn't until 1974, local time calculations based on the Earth revolutions around an equally mythological sun, that I discovered that this teaching had been neglected completely and then finally lost in the Western world. Of course, there are a lot of folks around now to help out with it. The Tibetans arrived here in large numbers, settling mostly in Berkeley, California, because it's the closest in climate and landscape to their native country. They have the knowledge, but they don't have the language skills and cultural, psychological background to communicate that knowledge to donkeys. I mean, Americans. Since the original publication of this manuscript, the teaching has arrived in the form of many refugees and visitors far from the Near East. And like all things, there's a reason for that too. Just as the lobes of the human brain periodically transfer activity from one to the other, left to right and right to left, so does the teaching, the Dharma, transfer from one hemisphere of the world to the other. Every 600 or 700 years, like clockwork, the Dharma, the spirit of the living earth, traverses west to east or east to west. Thus the male and female principles, teachers of the age, appear from time to time. In the east, and we're not talking about Boston, Massachusetts. The 10th avatar has already come and gone, and so came the end for the Dharma in the East. Now, for the next 600 years, there will appear in the West Tolkis and avatars and holy ones and appearances of the son of the, and appearances of the son and of the mother, endlessly nudging human primates to dig themselves out of sleep. And for some, a very few, there will be an awakening, and for the rest, a religion, and maybe even several religions. Meanwhile, in the East, humanity will sleep a while, wrapped in the thin comfort of high technology. Their waking day is finished for the moment, but never fear. The time will come again when it is their turn to hold the Dharma, their turn to hold the spirit within the world, their turn to labor in the world of being, and your turn to grab some shut-eye. 10 avatars will come. Each will take a rightful turn in the effort to maintain the waking state, thus earning a period, always far too short, of rest and relaxation. The time of each avatar is set by law, and thus their dawning and setting is determined. Now the time of the first avatar, Utsikotu. The word looks very similar to Quetzalcoatl, but instead of Q's, we're using U's. But that's the first avatar, and that time of the first avatar has come, and the first tokens are already here. We will be with you for the next 600 years, and then we will leave. Our task will have been completed. So this book is the result of the unusual combination of teachings, beings taught, and experience with these states and their consequences. Actually, there are quite a few individuals around who do know about these things, as you'll soon discover if you begin to fool around and actually experiment with these states and ideas. It just may occur that as you learn to handle death and rebirth, you may learn to handle life in the process. This is unavoidable, and if by chance you do happen to handle life better because of it, don't despair. You'll never get out of it alive. These readings for the Voyager are direct teachings of the guides. Perhaps you think of them as teachers, Sufis, Arhats, Bodhisattvas, and the instructions have been rendered into modern American usage. If you have any trouble following and applying these instructions, you might want to inquire through the publisher about further study material which expands the subject and treats it more in depth and detail. Now, you should remember the state that a Voyager in the labyrinths get into while still attached to the biological machine, as well as between lives in the 9 biological microdimensions. It's a state of extreme lucidity, so don't worry if you have trouble understanding the meaning of the text, because the Voyager in the labyrinth, with that all-embracing clarity of vision and understanding, won't have that problem. It's only in the form of human primates living in lower dimensions that we need footnotes. This is very interesting because it reminds me of the name of the channel is Dreams and Journeys, and I apologize for this tangent. It's probably happening more as I read, but the name of the channel is Dreams and Journeys. Something that I definitely is extremely interested in is dreams, and not even 2 days ago or 2 nights ago, I was recalling a dream I had with one of my friends, and I was explaining to her that in that state there's almost a sense of like unknown knowing. Like, it's very rare where I'll have to ask a question in a dream, because in that state it's like the question is already answered. It's this certain level of clarity that comes with being lucid. Now there might be some questions when I'm not lucid, but even still in those moments, it's still a certain sense of clarity of vision and understanding, as he just mentioned. Very interesting. And by the way, if you're wondering about the source of this book, it comes directly from the source of all books. In The Labyrinth, you'll notice, if you notice anything at all, that all books are the same book and that they say the same thing. Don't look around for someone else to hang it on. You are the source. Very interesting. Very interesting preface. And now we're going to get into the first chapter of the American Book of the Dead. Very interesting piece right here. And this first chapter is called Notes on the Labyrinth. And it reads as follows. So long as we seem to be somewhere, we can be sure that we are voyagers and that we are in the labyrinth. Whether we perceive ourselves as possessing a biological machine or not, the experience between death and rebirths carries with it an unforgettable experience of forgetfulness and an ego-shattering disintegration, which for the inexperienced voyager can be very unsettling, destroying any conscious connection from one lifetime to another. This is something that is spoken about consistently when it comes to these ego deaths experiences, whether it's something that's kick-started through psychedelics, usage or journeying through that, or just deep meditations, or through different lucid dreaming experiences. There definitely is that definitely could be extremely unsettling and scary on top of that. But it says that the attention of the voyager is designed to carry over and over through many different bodies in many different times and conditions. But if the attention is shattered by the sudden disruption of macro-dimensional transitions, it can only be attributed to the fact that the voyager didn't get familiarized with labyrinthine voyaging when the opportunity presented itself, which is now. Of course, all this labyrinth voyages is simply bait to get you to liberate yourself through this or any other process that developed. Many cultures, except of course the post-Native American culture, aka us, USA, have always been well informed about the between life states, and many voyagers have easily achieved liberation by passing through the terminal transition with an awakened attention. But this can only be achieved during the lifetime. If it's so easy, you may well ask, why doesn't everybody do it? Well, like most things, doing it requires actually doing it. And for most of us, it's like going to the dentist. We don't want to go until the pain becomes unbearable. And in this case of the labyrinth voyaging, by the time the pain becomes unbearable, it's too late to do anything but grit your non-phenomenal teeth and bear it until it's all over and you're spit out of the macro dimensions and slammed into yet another biological body. But once you learn to voyage, it's like falling off a bicycle. Once you've learned how, you never forget how. And even years and years later, you can get on a bike and fall right off as if it was only yesterday. As one voyages through the labyrinth, in the section between lives and the biological machine or another, one must have help. One must remain awake and alert, the full attention centered and self-sufficient. The reader remains constant to this aim, guiding the voyager through shocking ambushes of sudden macro-dimensional transitions, so that the voyager may attain the highest possible state. Here in this text is the method for achieving an expanded lifespan, not for the purpose of amusing oneself with quote-unquote immortality, which human beings have already have in the worst possible way, being immortal in a sense of permanent existence within a time frame and the time-space discontinuum of creation, but solely for the purpose of perfection of the self, to help in the great work, the aim of which is liberation and awakening of something much higher than oneself. One of the common responses to this teaching is to ask, why do we worry about something that isn't right here, right now? First of all, it is imperative to understand that we don't even have a word in this language to describe the state between life and death, and we don't have a word for the state itself either. That means that although we do have a word for the other parts of reality and existence, that is birth, life, and death, one of the four parts of reality is occulted or ignored in the common consciousness of the Westerner. The fact that is necessary, the fact that this necessary part of life has been totally occulted or occluded, and that's very funny. Occluded is occult, they're the same word. The fact that this necessary part of life has been totally occluded in our Western awareness is related to the fact that life itself has been misunderstood. Because if one realized that we do in fact live in a multidimensional labyrinth, one would also realize that the labyrinth extends in all directions, not just the four minor dimensions, which we suspiciously call space and time. It doesn't suddenly pop up out of nowhere, just so no one can get lost a few times and turned around in circles. We are always in the labyrinth, and that's why we need either a book of the dead as a guide or a living guide as a guide. The book has its drawbacks and disadvantages, but it is admittedly far less expensive in any ordinary sense of the word than the ambulatory alternative. Very interesting words. How to use this book. We have another interesting piece. Just as a midwife assists birth, the reader of the American Book of the Dead assists voyagers who have passed into the micro dimensions to attain liberations or to achieve a conscious and deliberate rebirth on re-entry into the human dimension, in which the voyager may select a living creature with which to associate. Such symbiotic association is commonly called, from the organic view, a lifetime. The reader gives this guidance through correct application of the instructions for passage through a period of severe stress, as is the condition during the voyage in the labyrinth between death and rebirth. Instructions are delivered to the voyager through readings, the lighting, atmospherics, and music, often supplying the mood, acting as some sort of emotional carrier wave, modulated by the thought pattern and imposed images suggested by the text. Readings can be either given in the presence of the human biological machine or through an article formerly possessed by the voyager or through a photograph of the voyager's biological machine. If a photograph is used as a contact element, it should be transported to the reading chamber in a light-proof container. Cardboard wrapped with aluminum foil is recommended. The package containing the photograph should be opened by the reader only, in the space in which the reading is to be performed. The basic idea of using an article, such as a photograph, and a familiar sound, such as the name, with which the voyager would automatically identify, in reading in the presence of the biological machine, is to establish a communication bonding that will tend not to break during the disorientation in the in-between live state in the labyrinth. The optimum method of bonding reader and voyager is to establish a good communication and friendship before the voyager enters the labyrinth, primarily through frequent practice readings. However, where there was no previous contact, it is possible to establish a good bond by using the name, place, and time of entry into the in-between live state, such as the hospital, home, or scene of accident, any location which will help the voyager fix the attention on the reading. Age at time of terminus, and a good physical description of the individual, then through visualization the voyager's mentality. Then through visualizing the voyager mentally, reading to that visualized form. The essential point is to establish contact, and the best contact is established on mental and emotional levels of visualization. While material objects may be used to make initial contact, the readings and instructions are actually directed toward the voyager in spiritual form, not toward the human biological machine or material objects. Once contact have been definitely established, the reader is able to deliver labyrinth guided instructions with certainty. Sudden loss of contact, which could be tangibly felt by the reader, usually means that the individual has taken rebirth. How can one be certain that contact has been established? Definite sensations and perception changes are associated with contact. To begin with, one understands every word of the instructions when one reads them. If words seem slurred or unintelligible to us, we're probably not in contact with the instruction. If words seem slurred or unintelligible to us, we're probably not in contact and the instruction is not being received. The reason one understands the instructions when contact is good is that the bond which has been established confers the clarity of understanding from the voyager to the reader. Some of the sensations indicating that a good contact has been established are a tingling at the back of the neck, a slight feeling of imbalance, hearing and visual perception greatly heightened. Some readers have reported that they get a funny feeling in the gut or the top of their head felt as if it's opened up and you can hear things for miles and see through walls. Each of these are simply indicators that tell us that we are in strong communication with the voyager. Our own perceptions, sensations, and feelings may be Our own perceptions, sensations, and feelings may be radically different from the examples given above. But one thing is certain. When we do definitely establish contact with somebody in the in-between life states, we'll feel sensations and perceptual changes as a result. If we establish contact with somebody in the in-between life state, our biological machine and being attention will tend to vibrate sympathetically. This phenomena is called resonance. This is the same phenomena that occurs when one strikes a C-tune fork and hold it together next to another C-tune fork. The second tuning fork, even though unstruck, will begin to vibrate along with the first one. Sounds can create sympathetic motion and thus can be used, like photon-driven solar cells, to move an individual through the labyrinth. As one learns from using the teachings and reading it aloud, sound has tremendous power. It can heal, liberate, awaken, and even amuse. When reader and voyager are vibrating in sympathetic resonance, it seems as if we are reading to ourselves, but for the benefit of another. And so the strong sonic and emotional reverberation results. The reader can help to improve the chances that the individual in the labyrinth does not have anything drawing him or her back by arranging the events surrounding Terminus, the voyager's exit from human dimension occasionally through intentional embarkation, perhaps an artificially induced out of the body excursion or macro-dimensional expansion, more often through the process of biological death. The reader can help out the bonds of attachment for the voyager. The more the family is allowed to participate, the less likely they will fall into sadness and grief, simply because the more that they participate in the guiding process, the more they will understand death and dying as a means of freeing oneself from the The more the family is allowed to participate, the less likely they will be to fall into sadness and grief, simply because the more they participate in the guiding process, the more they will understand death and dying as a means of freeing oneself for the ultimate adventure. Under ordinary conditions, the voyager will succumb to the force of unconsciousness from the moment of terminus and remain in a sleep state throughout the labyrinth voyage unless he or she has been specially prepared during life through visualization, emotional reinforcement, and in the realm of transcendent moods. I'm going to read that one more time. Under ordinary conditions, the voyager will succumb to the force of unconsciousness from the moment of terminus and remain in a sleep state throughout the labyrinth voyage, unless he or she has been specially prepared during the life through visualization, emotional reinforcement, in the realm of transcendent moods, and frequent reading practice, lying prone and being read to and reading to others. One's basic aim in this respect is to reach the voyager before terminus and drill the instructions until they have become drenched in habit, literally second nature. Intentionally acquired macro-dimensional habits can greatly enable the voyager to remain awake through ordinarily overwhelming events in the labyrinth. And when rebirth becomes inevitable, the reader can help by indicating specific bodies, times, and spaces in which the voyager may choose to be reborn, a lifetime in which the voyager may be able to accomplish the next lifetime purpose in the voyager's evolutionary spiral. It can be said that the reader is responsible for selecting options for a labyrinth voyager who has no decision-making mental equipment. Of course, this is not necessary for those who have made efforts to apply the teaching in life by working on themselves, developing a resistance to stress, and a high degree of being attention. They should have learned how to make good decisions with the essential self, without the need for rational, linear brain reasoning. Such individuals no longer need a mind with which to think. This condition of the essential self was called in Zen the attainment of no mind, which means no mind but plenty of attention and interest without hunger or desire. No mind means no mind but plenty of attention and interest without hunger and desire. The voyager needs not wonder whether or not this data will be there when it is needed, because it will be, even for those who have practiced the teaching in life through consistent intentional stress, visualization, and psycho-emotional reinforcement. Readings are performed as a backup just in case something should go wrong. It should be a relief to know that no matter what happens, there is a reader out there somewhere who has the sensitivity and integrity to deliver labyrinth instructions at the precise point at which they are needed and not a moment before. And that no matter how far from human dimension we may wander, help is always available at extreme need. The operant words being need and extreme. As we learn more about the states between death and rebirth, we learn more about ourselves as immortal beings and tend to regard death and dying not as evil or fearsome, but just as another rather uncomfortable and often inconvenient part of the voyage and through the space-time discontinuum. The Labyrinth 2 loses its gargantuan properties and the macro dimensions take on another, more real perspective, or rather a complete lack of perspective. As the reality holography, which is the universe, flattens and softens into a sphere of plastic perceptions, rebirth is no longer a boogeyman, and the material universe is less of a nightmare, or no greater a nightmare than it has been all along. After the doctors and nurses has given up trying to keep the body alive, and the voyager is trapped in the neural circuitry, and they have gone away, we'll be the only ones around with any idea of what to do next. A doctor works to prevent death, but a reader does not try to prevent dying and death. Why? That is the first opportunity for the Voyager to get free of the biological machine and the incessant chatter of the restless little mind since the last time the Voyagers was in the in-between lives section of the labyrinth. The place of a reader during the period of macro-dimensional voyaging is a position of primary importance, prominence, and trust. It is occupied with dignity and integrity. Above all, a reader must care, really care, what happens to another Voyager. At the same time, one cannot become identified with another Voyager. The reader walks the fine line between total empathy and total non-attachment. It is especially important that the reader be able to read aloud clearly and distinctively in order to provide the instruction necessary for the Labyrinth Voyager to be able to receive it and use it. Here are the simple but essential skills we need to develop for reading. The first skill is to read slowly and distinctly. The second skill is to read the instructions as if you had just thought of them. The third is read each passage as if it is for the first time. The fourth is don't just read an instruction, deliver it. The fifth is read every instruction as if it is important for it to get through. The sixth is to read with purpose and certainty. The seventh is to read what is actually there, not something you substituted. When reading to the Voyager, don't hurry. Interlocking resonance ensures that you will be delivering the exact instructions at the exact moment that it is necessary. Interlocking resonance causes your instruction to coincide precisely with the exact stress point at which it applies. An instruction contains an integral part of its text to the address code encryption, which directs its guiding force to that specific point of stress in the labyrinth to which it applies. In the macro dimensions, time is not a measure of events, but a function of space. A sequence of events occurs in its totality. The Voyager moves through this frozen sequence, as an actor might move across a stage. All moments are equally accessible, all space within easy reach. It is possible to do all readings for a Labyrinth Voyager in one single day. Even so, the subjective time flow in the human dimension may appear to correspond to the voyage in a period of days, months, and sometimes years. Each reading in the text printed in boldface is the exact address of each stress point in the labyrinth sequence. Delivering a precise reading for each instruction assures that the instruction will get to the point at which it is needed. Strike a bell before the boldface reading and again after the boldface reading, clearly parenthesizing the reading with sound for the Voyager. In the first stage readings, a bell strike is appropriate before and after each numbered reading. During the second and third stage reading, use the bell strike to begin and end the daily reading for that chamber. If you choose to read through the entire text for a Voyager, which certainly cannot hurt and may be to the Voyager's benefit, you should use the bell strike before and after each boldface reading to distinguish it as a stress point instruction, parenthesized by sound from the ordinary text. You can mistime the reading by an hour or more and still be sure that the reading will get to the point at which the being needs to apply it, but that is no reason to become careless. Just because you know that there is a large tolerance in the timing of the reading Specific times for readings are recommended: 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., because energy levels of the earth are affected by temperature and astrometrics. And under these early mornings and early evening conditions, ambient astrophysic plasma and other electromagnetic phenomena are at an optimum for macro-dimensional contact. If you read at haphazard times, you will not get the energy to perform your tasks nearly as well as if you make it a daily habit. And it is another good method of reinforcement to make readings part of your daily life. You can do several readings for several voyagers in series by using the name and photograph to address each voyager, following this with the appropriate text. Some renunciants do this all day long for as many as several hundred voyagers. Get into the habit of doing the readings every morning and every evening at exactly the same time, say 6 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the evening. Then after a week of doing this, don't do it one evening. Notice a definite feeling of unused energy. That's why we do readings at the same time each day. You will find that by doing these exercises, you will begin to feel very good about reading aloud to anyone or even reading aloud to yourself. Think about it for a moment. When you are alone reading a book, are you actually reading to no one? Of course not. Yet many people will say that reading alone is reading to no one. That's like the old joke. What does he do when he's alone? I don't know. I've never been with him when he's alone. Constant practice and good discipline at maintaining your exercises will develop into a clear understanding of what you are doing as a reader. Good discipline and maintaining your exercises on a high level of energy input is the only way to achieve this. Only by putting the teaching into action will you really learn what this is all about. As you might have noticed, just reading about doing has no learning effect. As you continue applying the teaching in action, you will inevitably become more and more aware of subtleties. And the terminology and structure of the teaching will begin to make practical sense. As this occurs, you will be able to see more and more ways in which you can apply the teaching in your everyday life to make you more able to handle your existence, to help others handle theirs, and ways to use these ideas in a whole body, mind, emotional, spiritual healing technique, along with many other applications not covered in this present volume, which are now available in home study courses on videotape and in work manuals. During the first few readings, you may notice that you tend to lapse occasionally into inattention. You might want to be there for the reading, but your attention wanders before you can do anything about it. It may even be a minute or two before you notice that you seem to unaccountably drifted off and that the words are coming out of your mouth, but that they have all become gabble and gibberish. Like hearing someone in a dream and you come out of it with the start, realizing that you aren't following the meaning of the text. This has probably happened to you if you drive a car. You suddenly realize that you haven't been paying attention to anything for several minutes. Some people can drive for several hours without being really aware of what they've been doing. Everything just goes on automatic pilot. In delivering labyrinth instructions, your attention must be focused directly and firmly on every single word that goes across, paying particular heed to the danger signal that contact is momentarily broken. A word, phrase, or visualization that you don't understand. Eventually, you will develop the ability to be there with full attention for every word, every phrase, every single instruction. The specific remedy for wandering attention is to read as if someone's lives depend on it. You can get that idea, you can get the idea that the Voyager is in danger unless you get the necessary instructions across. Sometimes a feeling of danger succeeds where the best mental intention fails. You can't maintain constant being attention because the emotions of the biological machine will put the being attention into sleep. The trick is to arouse the emotions along with the being attention. There are some ways to accomplish this. I hesitate to bring this up only because it is another of those things that can't be handled in a book. It needs a coach and a supervised situation to give this kind of instruction. You should know that it is available, but only in a workshop situation. Several remedies you could use without having to go to a special course to learn to arouse and maintain the emotional and physical attentions are available right now. Number 1 is to read as if you are reading the material for the first time. Number 2 is to deliver the labyrinth instructions as if something terrible will happen if it does not get through. And number 3 is to read as if the individual you are reading to will someday be reading for you while you are in the labyrinth. That is very interesting. And it made me instantly remember a moment where when I first was reading this text, I'm sorry for the tangent, but it was a moment when I first was reading the text, and pretty much what came into my mind's eye was, you're reading for you. Like, not this you in this moment, but a you in a future moment. For lack of a better words, of course. But read as if the individual you're reading to will someday be reading for you while you are in the labyrinth, and will remember with joy or bitterness the job that you did for them. Something else may subtly occur to you. Something else may suddenly occur to you as you're reading, so it might be well to mention it. You could well be projecting the scenario that you are not now in the in-between life states, and that you are reading for someone else, a Voyager in the macro dimensions, but you suddenly come to realize that it is really you who is you suddenly come to realize that it is really you who is in the in-between life state. I remember reading the beginning portion and then reading that portion that I just read after the initial thought of reading to yourself came to mind, and just busted out laughing. Literally. Very interesting. So there might come a moment where you realize that it could be you that's reading this for you. And in this moment, you actually are in the in-between life states. Very interesting, very interesting. But you suddenly come to realize that it is really you who is in the in-between life states. We are very capable of creating for ourselves a protective mechanism, a semblance of ordinary, familiar reality to disguise what's really happening. Now you have a good reason to read with attention, as if someone's very being depended on it. It might be your own. And now we have a picture of the Labyrinth reading schedule. And that concludes the first portion, titled Notes on the Labyrinth, plus the preface. The next portion that we're going to be reading is Introduction to the Macro Dimensions of the Labyrinth. Very interesting book, though. Very interesting book. And it definitely invoked a lot of thoughts as I was reading through it the first time. Very honored to be able to read it again and be able to read it in this format where it could be of benefit to someone else, like you, if you're listening. But yep, we'll be back tomorrow reading the next chapter, so stay tuned if you thought this was interesting.